Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us for CISO Forum Canada, Day 2. Espionage. It's a loaded word not to be used lightly. At the very high level, when you think about espionage, you think about the loss of political, government secrets, the leakage of plans. But if you dig deeper into it, it's about a system of tools, a system of insider threats at times that can result in massive damage to a nation state, its infrastructure, its economic patterns, and its social cosmos in general. You may wonder that as the world goes to this new normal, how are we going to deal with battles between nation states, which shifts in the threat landscape, and more importantly, with orienting ourselves to thinking about cybersecurity and cyber warfare and spy warfare through a completely different lens. My name is Ali Hirji. I lead the cybersecurity and AI practices at Durham College, and I am thankful to today's keynote sponsors, VMware Carbon Black, for bringing us a topic that is not only important, but timely at the very same time. Your keynote today is going to be delivered by Eric O'Neill, an individual who needs no introduction. If you've read the book Grade A, you'll know that this is the story, or this is about to be the keynote about the journey to uncovering one of the most interesting and fascinating stories around espionage and spy warfare and cyber warfare. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to bring to you an individual who was formerly an FBI expert in counterterrorism and many other fields, someone who was placed in a situation where the student had to outsmart the teacher. Eric, without further ado, welcome to CISO Forum Canada, and I'll turn it over to you to take us away for the opening keynote.
Thank you, Ali, and hello, Canada. I just want to start by saying that tomorrow is Remembrance Day in Canada and Veterans Day here in the United States where I am. I'm just outside of Washington, D.C. And we have many veterans here at VMware, and we honor all those who served and all the past heroes. Now that we've talked about heroes, let's talk about a villain, Robert Hansen. He has just had the best day of his life. His family isn't in town. It's a cold February Sunday, but he makes the most of it, throwing snowballs with his grandchildren and throwing the frisbee with his dog and his best friend who's been in town for the weekend. And at the end of this wonderful day, they go to church together, they have a wonderful dinner together. He drives his friend to the airport. And for the first time, remember, this is before the crushing incidents of 9/11, when you used to be able to actually go into the airport with your friend, go right to the gate and drop them off and watch the plane fly off. Security changes everything. Massive events require a change in security, which changes our lives. For the first time, Robert Hansen kicks his buddy off at the curb, waves goodbye, and drives off. And his friend would later remark to the FBI that that was odd. If you're wondering, that's a little bit of foreshadowing. Us authors like to use that when we're telling a good story. And on his way home, Robert Hansen stops at a little park called Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia. It's only a stone's throw away from Washington, D.C., and even closer to his home. He parks his car and he walks into that park through a well-trod trail. It's been used by many hikers and dog walkers and joggers, and it's a cut through every morning for people to get to the metro so they can make their commute into Washington, D.C. And he reaches the center of that park and he stands on a little footbridge and he looks around him. Now, autumn has already stripped the leaves off the trees. It's cold in Washington, D.C. in February. And so he can see all around him and he knows that he's alone. This is important because Robert Hansen reaches into his sport coat and he pulls out a package. It's about that big. It's wrapped in trash bags and packing tape. It's completely protected from the elements. He steps off the bridge. He slides the package into the superstructure just under the bridge where it won't be seen by a casual observer or kids at play. Gets back on the bridge, knocks the dirt off his shoes, and he smiles to himself. because Robert Hansen has just loaded his final drop to the Russians after 22 years of espionage. Think about that. We are in 2001. So Robert Hansen has just loaded a drop after 22 years of spying, which means that he began to spy for the Soviet Union, and he continued to spy after the fall of the Soviet Union and the reformation into the Russian Federation, and we never caught him. Now, my job as an undercover operative responsible for counterterrorism and counterintelligence, which means I chased down spies and terrorists for my entire career, working fully undercover. We were catching Cold War spies all during my career. We caught Aldrich Ames, Jim Nicholson, we caught Earl Pitts and many others, but we never caught Hansen. We were catching these guys because at the fall of the Soviet Union, those KGB officers who used to be living better than everyone else, had the best jobs, were fired. They disbanded the KGB and reformed it into two different services. But those guys weren't going to go retire to a dacha or beat their swords into plowshares and become farmers or something. They did what they were trained to do. They stole secrets. And many of them sold them right to the FBI or the MI6, and we trade information. But a few of them saved those secrets for a rainy day, for retirement plans. And while we were collecting all those secrets, we never caught Hansen. And there's a reason for that. And he will go down in history as the most damaging spy in US history, certainly in the FBI's history, because he was able to steal everything he did from his position in the FBI. He was the worst trusted insider I can think of. He stole information regarding our nuclear weapons program, information regarding operations that Western countries were launching against the Soviet Union, information about undercover assets, including some of our spies who were blown back to Moscow and shot in the back of the head. He even gave up a tunnel that we had bored under the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. And at the end of that tunnel, we put a listening device and we could hear everything they were saying. Golden intelligence. The problem, even before we finished the tunnel, Hansen had told the Russians that we were boring that tunnel right there. And so, of course, they gave us false information, years of it. So he was a bad guy. But how? How was he able to steal all this information for 22 years and hide from arguably the top investigative agency on Earth? Because he was not just the worst spy in US history, he was our first cyber spy. Hansen was able to do what he did because he stole information by exploiting computer systems that were never meant to defend, certainly not from an insider like him. And he had access to everything. In fact, at one point, the FBI task force who was hunting this spy that we had named Gray Suit, the most nefarious spy that had gotten away from us for 20 some years, asked the top Russian analyst to help them identify who this mole could be. And that person was Robert Hansen. That's right. He was asked to catch himself. If you're a spy, that is the best place to be. It doesn't get any better. So what has happened? This is the theme I want to leave with you today. If nothing else, if you take away nothing else from this keynote, I want you to remember this. There are no hackers. Let that sink in a minute. This is a cybersecurity keynote, and I've just said there are no hackers. There are no hackers. There are only spies. Hacking is nothing more than the necessary evolution of espionage. If we took information that back in Hansen's early career as a spy used to be stored and shared and processed in paper in these things called file cabinets, and we digitized it, entered it in computer systems, and now use computer systems to collaborate, to share, to network, to do these keynotes, to do everything that we used to do before this pandemic threw us back into our homes in person. The spies had to evolve. Because in order for spies to succeed, they need to steal intelligence. And if intelligence is in computer systems, they had to become the hackers. And as we have made information more important, as we have created this connected world, we've created a playground for attackers and spies. Because right now, data is the currency of our lives. We can't do anything without it. So how are these spies getting away with it? Because these spies are using traditional espionage techniques in order to fool a person and break into computer systems. The people are the targets of the spies. As I'm going to tell you, the criminals are modeling the most successful events of espionage. Well, let's start with the password. We rely too much on passwords. 81% of successful attacks in the last number of years have used stolen passwords. The bad guys aren't even working hard. Why? Well, according to the World Economic Forum, the dark web will be the third largest economy next year. Can you believe that? The third largest economy is this underground collection of information that's shared illegally, most of it illegally. And on the dark web, you can buy virtually anything if you want to launch a cyber attack. Custom malware bought and sold on the dark web has really led to an unprecedented number of attacks, especially ransomware attacks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. You can even buy, this is great, a hacker for hire, right? A cyber attacker for hire, a cyber criminal. They can launch malicious attacks against a rival or, for example, a competing corporation. And we have even seen cases, and if there are any students in the audience listening, where people have gone on the dark web, students, hired a cyber attacker to launch denial of service attacks against his school in order to get out of a test. Don't do that. That only worked in the movie Ferris Bueller. It doesn't work in real life, and he ended up arrested. And by the way, just an interesting fact, in just the first 10 months of 2019, when we were thrown into the pandemic and all stuck at home, more than 500 schools in the US faced ransomware attacks, and quite a few in Canada as well. So that tells you the new way that students are trying to think about getting out of tests. So it's not just, hiring a hacker. Custom malware is now being used in 50% of these attacks. That means that somebody is designing and producing malicious software just to be used in cyber attacks, which means that the reason the dark web is going to be the third largest economy is because it is a clearinghouse. It is a new service. It is attack software as a service. There are people who develop it. There are people who are programmers, and there are people who are distributors on the dark web, and everyone is making a ton of money. It is the new business of bank robbery. It is the new business of exploitation, of attacking people in order to make money. And that's why we see so much ransomware. You can purchase this stuff to empower criminals, spies, and terrorists. And many of these people would not have the sophisticated resources to execute these attacks. And what also happens is when the spies use these things for espionage, they end up being sold on the dark web. Because once something is out, it gets used. As an example, remember the Wannacry ransomware attack that spread throughout the world, which was stolen from US intelligence and then weaponized and sent out to attack everyone. It was North Korea who sent that out. It knocked out 350,000 computer systems before we could figure out a way to stop it. And now that same Wannacry ransomware attack is sitting on the dark web and being bought, and is the primary attack that is still used in ransomware attacks today. So criminals are taking a page from the spy handbook. And by the way, if you're going to be a spy, the best thing you can do is not just attack. You want to use counter incident response. It's being used in 82% of attacks. That means that these attackers, and often they're criminals who are modeling spies, like I said, are not just launching an attack. They're also using what I called in the FBI, what we call counter surveillance. They are looking for your spy hunters and trying to foil them. They hide in your system. They erase their presence. And this is especially important when they want to compromise a large amount of systems. You've heard of the big game hunters. These are ransomware attackers who go after cities, municipalities. A number of different municipalities in Canada have been hit by these guys, just as they have in the United States. They slowly, over months, collect a large number of systems before they bring it all down at once. And then the ransom requests are huge. And they can do all sorts of things in their counter IR, counter surveillance, hunting, your spy hunting, hunters. They can manipulate logs or timestamps. They can disable your security. They can use alternate authentication. They can install rootkits. And you know what they love to do? They maintain command and control without leaving a trail, which means they can come back later. Now, this happens a lot in social media attacks where attackers, especially our celebrities, right? They're always a target. Celebrities get attacked through social media. And then what the attackers want to do is create command and control of their social media attacks. And that's why recently you saw different people on Twitter whose accounts were used to say all sorts of crazy things. It's not just stealing the pictures that the celebrities shouldn't have on their phone. And this, of course, all of this has grown ransomware as a dark web business. In fact, the #1 dark web business today. So let's talk about Canada a little bit because, hey, that's where we are right now. We're all virtually here in Canada. Still makes me a little bit nuts to say that. I'd rather be there with you, but here we are. Ransom demands in Canada from ransomware attacks, right? Get this. They totaled between almost 84 million Canadian dollars to nearly 336 million last year. Now, if you factor in downtime costs, that impact is between 571 million and 2.3 billion. That, of course, those statistics assume a cost of about $10,000 per day in downtime. That's $10,000 that no business wants to spend to be down and trying to get back up. But you know, Gartner recently put the average at more than $5,600 per minute. So that is not the most conservative number. Ransomware attacks can be deadly, but they can be stopped. We also, of course, have an email problem, and this leads to the majority of the successful cyber attacks. Think about it this way. We have become a society. I used to say a nation, right? It's a society, a world of introverts. This pandemic has thrown us into our homes. This computer, our cameras, our microphones are now our window to the world. It's how we conduct business. It's how we collaborate. It's how we share. It's how the world economy continues to move. It's the way that we connect. So in a sense, even though we're connecting digitally, we're even more introverted because none of us leave our homes. Think of it this way. If you get a call on your phone, right, and you see unknown number, what is the first thing you do? Unless you're in sales, you ignore it. We all do. There is no way you're going to pick up an unknown number, unknown name, unknown number, not picking up. You let it go, you wait, you watch your phone and see if they went to voicemail. And if they went to voicemail, maybe it's important. Then you listen to the voicemail. And you think about whether you're going to call back, whether you're going to respond, whether you'll text, whether it's even important, or whether you just delete that voicemail, block that number, and turn your back on that telemarketer. What have you just done to the phone call? You've turned it into an email. That's right. We love email. Introverts love emails. And I get it. Emails are great. You can send them anytime. You can even set it to send later. So your colleagues and your boss or whoever doesn't think you're crazy because you're up at 4 a.m. working. You can check your spelling. You can make sure everything's accurate. You can do a little research. You can think about the request that someone is sending you through the email before you reply. And you don't have to worry about waking anyone up across the world because you don't want to Google the time zones. So email is convenient, but it is also our Achilles heel in cybersecurity because email is the gateway for spies who are trained in traditional intelligence, trained to fool a person, to fool that person they need to in order to get them to click a link or open an attachment or many of the other ways that phishing and spear phishing emails lead to exploitation and cyber attacks. So we need to really think about this because it turns out that statistically 23% of people click on email links that they shouldn't, or open attachments that they shouldn't, regardless of training or not. So we can't just teach our people not to do it. Some of these spies are truly masters at fooling a person. So what we need is better technology to beat the spies who are using technology to come after our people. Now, I looked up another Canadian statistic that is interesting. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, right, recently said that spear phishing has defrauded people of more money than any other scam in Canada. That means the criminals aren't even leaving their homes. They don't even have to go rob a bank because they can attack everybody just sitting from their computer. And this is worse during this pandemic. I keep coming back to the pandemic, but pandemic makes things worse. The threat is higher in 2020. We're all working from home. We're often on our own personal devices, CISOs, and those personal devices, as you know, are not built for security. You don't know what someone's using, what router they're using, what security they're using on their personal home. Are they using the laptop you sent them home with, or would they prefer to use the one that they already have set up at home? And who else is using those devices when dad or mom is walking away? There was a case where a massive cyber attack was led back to one person's laptop, and he would take his laptop home every day. And when they went through the laptop to find out where the attack came from, it turned out that he would take his laptop home, work for a couple hours, then go to sleep. Then his son would wake up, sneak down, and he had installed a game sharing app on it so that he could play games on his father's much more expensive, faster laptop. And that's how the attackers got in. So we need to be careful. And our guard is down as we fight against the pandemic. So look, cyber spies, cyber criminals, and cyber terrorists are using the crisis as cover to launch attacks. And they're doing it mercilessly. And they're doing it when we least expect it. Let me tell you about a scam that's hitting lots of people, especially in Canada. It's called the romance scam, right? It happens to a lot of employees, especially those of us who might not be married, or maybe are married and not quite as responsible as we should be, stuck in home and we're bored, and you spend time connecting on social media. This is happening a lot all over the world. So there is an employee who works for a major company in Canada. He works in IT. We'll call him John. We're going to change names. He meets this beautiful woman named Louisa, who serves in the Royal Canadian Navy, and she befriends him on Facebook. And they speak for a couple of weeks, but she tells him she can't meet him because she's stationed overseas, but they make this connection. Now, Louisa likes to send links to her picture file sharing site, and they chat a number of times online. She has a LinkedIn account. He's looked at it. She's active on Instagram and Facebook. She's friends with some of his friends on Facebook, and they like the same people on Instagram. She said she'd used dating apps in the past, and lots of people, by the way, are using dating apps right now, but never really liked them, and he kind of agreed. And finally, they planned to meet, and she asked him for money to pay for her flight to see him. Then he thought, this is great. I've been waiting to see her forever. And he sends her the money, wires her the money. You see where this is going? Gets worse. So the next person he hears from his cybersecurity response team. They trace back a breach to his account and his credentials that led to a massive ransomware attack against his business. And Louisa, that's not her real name, doesn't actually exist. The spy, the cyber criminal, sitting in some other country, extorts the company for $35,000. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it could have been a lot more. And John is out of pocket the $2,000 flight. Now, if you think that this couldn't happen, you guys, last year it was reported that Canadians searching for love on the internet, all right, everybody, or other dating sites, reportedly lost about $143 million due to these romance scams. Ouch. Why? Bad guys stay one step ahead of security. Robert Hansen spent a career doing this, and it took a career of mine to catch him. So what can you do to save your company? I want to just talk through a couple of things that you should all be thinking about before I end with how we actually caught Robert Hansen. Good, we're going to close with a spy story. Look, cybercrime damage costs, we've all heard this number, but let's just put it in the top of our minds, are predicted to hit about $6 trillion by next year. In order to stop this from happening to you, you need to be active in your security, not reactive. That's the problem with security. A bad guy does something and we react to that attack, and we spin and think and learn and thought leadership and figure out all the ways to keep it from happening again. But by then it's too late. They've moved on to the next attack. We need to hunt the threat before the threat hunts us. You are all spy hunters. Yes, you are. If you are a CISO, if you work in IT, if you work in cybersecurity, you are a spy hunter. Put it on your resume. Tell them I said you could. So what can you do to hunt these spies? Number one, security must be intrinsic. You cannot bolt it on. At VMware, we're incorporating the best security into your infrastructure and control points. We're doing it in new ways. And we're doing it across any app, any cloud, and any device. That's important because it allows you to hunt threats, not react to them. The idea is to future-proof your enterprise against tomorrow's threats, not just today. And that's why I love the cloud. Embrace the cloud. Virtualization that uses the best endpoint security is critical. Why? Because you need to continually update and change and monitor those endpoints. And the only way to do it fast is by leveraging the power of the cloud. Let's talk about some things that are a little less obvious, right? You need to set up secure communication channels because when you're in the middle of the event, the last thing you want to do is worry about how we're going to talk to each other and how we're going to resolve the problem. You also have to assume that when there is an event, that the adversary has already figured out multiple avenues back into the organization. It's not enough just to find the attack on one endpoint and think we're clean. You then have to do the work to go and be a threat hunter and see if you can find where else they went. Because like I said, these big game hunters and others who love to exploit ransomware attacks are trying to collect a lot of computer systems, jump between networks, including jumping from one company to the other, what we call island hopping. And that's something you have to worry about as well. Make sure that those other companies and apps and vendors who connect to your network have good security and that you're protecting those connections because island hopping attacks are on the rise. And another thing we've seen is attackers will go after the low-hanging fruit, the soft target, in order to get to the hard target. And that's you. Hopefully that's you. Make yourself the difficult target to go after, and then you got a bit of a better chance. You have to be able to detect and respond across a lot of workloads. You have to protect your cloud environments, your containers, your microservices, everywhere where the work is happening nowadays. Look, all of the applications that exist between your system's networks and the endpoints. And that's why I love to talk about the endpoint. If you do nothing else, move security as close as you can to the person who will screw up and click that link and make that mistake. The person who is going to be fooled by the spy. And that's why I always advocate endpoint security. You want to, especially with the home things that we're dealing with right now because of the pandemic, you have to segment your personal and professional networks. I mean, that's the best things that you could do. It's hard, I know, but home routers and networks are vulnerable. So think about ways that you can protect your systems of your personnel who are all working from home. And then finally, if you want to really save yourself from a lot of the basic, most common attacks, which are the spear phishing attacks and just the phishing attacks, leverage email security. Work hard to ensure that you're using multi-factor everywhere. You're using some second sign-on method. Get away from the password. Passwords are terrible. And I'll tell you why passwords are completely and utterly useless. You might have the best password in the entire world. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about your employees, right? The people who aren't in the know. Maybe they decided they're going to come up with the greatest password ever invented to man. It is the first line of my favorite book as a child, but it's backwards, and I threw an exclamation point right in the center, right? No one will ever crack that. No one's going to ever guess it. I mean, it's this ridiculously long password, and I memorized that sucker. And I can even type it really fast because I've been using it since 2013, and it's been breached a lot of times. Why? Because no one's ever cracked the password. They've just bought it off the dark web. If you've been using it since 2013, then I guarantee you it was lost in the Yahoo breach when the Russians stole 3 billion usernames and passwords. Or maybe Facebook when they lost 50 million usernames and passwords. Or it goes on and on. The biggest hotel chain in the world lost 500 million usernames and passwords. I mean, I could keep going. They're all on the dark web and they're for sale. Like you can buy 10,000 of them for like a few bucks. And all someone has to do is use them. And if you just reuse the same password over and over and over again, all they have to do is find that. And then if they want to get into your business and you don't have two-factor authentication turned on, use your first letter of your first name, your last name at yourbusiness.com and use that password and they might get in. And that's how these attackers are becoming so successful. So look, I want to talk just a little bit about VMware Carbon Black and what we're doing, and I'm going to get to the spy story. We are the leader in this intrinsic security platform, and we will give you the tools to hunt the threat before the threat hunts you. The idea, everything we're talking about in cybersecurity, bringing counterintelligence to cybersecurity, is to protect you and future-proof you for tomorrow. So look, if the FBI spent all this time trying to find Hansen, and they couldn't catch him for 22 years. How are you going to hunt those threats? Well, here's how we got Hansen. I mean, it started out, we got a little lucky. Just like when you notice something is wrong, we got a tip. One of those ex-KGB officers that I told you about, the intelligence officers who were out of a job and hid those secrets, hid a file in his attic for a rainy day. And in that file were like the worst game of Clue ever. Remember the game of Clue? It was Colonel Mustard in the library with the wrench, right? Well, we get a file and in it is a letter, a cassette tape, and a trash bag. And with that, we had to figure out who the greatest spy in US history was. Well, the nice thing about being the FBI is we can run fingerprints. So we ran fingerprints on the trash bag. We listened to the cassette tape and we let a few people in the FBI who knew a lot of people in the FBI listen. And we read the letters and analyzed it. And it turned out that all of them pointed to one of the senior FBI analysts, an agent, a decorated agent, a veteran who was about to retire in just a few years. In just a year, Robert Hansen. The fingerprints were a partial match. The voice on the cassette tape was his. And the letters had language that he was known to use. And so an investigation was started. Now, we had some problems. One, we kept it very small, so we didn't have a lot of manpower because we didn't know who we might be working with. Two, Hansen had been sent to the State Department to sort of ride out his career until he retired because he had some problems, some HR problems. He had been confronted by one of the women who worked for him at one point, and he kind of had to throw her to the ground. And you don't do that in the US government, but you also can't get fired from the US government. So he just got sent out, put to pasture, if you will. So we had to get him back into FBI headquarters. And three, it was December of 2000, and he was about to retire in April of 2001. So we had to give him a job that was going to make him interested, keep him engaged, and make him spy. Because we only had circumstantial evidence. We had to actually get him to spy in order to catch him red-handed, and that's what we needed. The FBI is amazing at putting together an investigation. Now, you've heard a lot of the bureaucracy and all the politics and all the nonsense that are going on with the FBI, but when they're after their man, they do a good job. And this was a spy and one of our own. So we built a mousetrap. We built a new division within the FBI, a full section called the Information Assurance Section. Now, information assurance back in 2000, 2001 means something different today. It means cybersecurity. We put the most damaging spy in US history, our first cyber spy, someone who had exploited computer systems throughout the FBI throughout a career in order to steal information, in charge of building cybersecurity for the FBI. It's pretty brave, right? And the FBI looked around and found the only person apparently who knew how to hunt a spy and turn a computer on in that office with him. And that ended up being this guy. I was an old hacker from the 80s. I wasn't really working in computer security. I was a field operative chasing down spies, but I knew how to turn a computer on. And I could talk the talk and walk the walk and do the cybersecurity work with Robert Hansen. I could also hunt him as a spy, my overt job and my covert job. And they put us both in those rooms and they asked me to find the information that would lead to Hansen's arrest. And this is how I did it. Bad guys have routines. We all have routines. When you used to go into your office, right, you would have a security badge. Most of you do. In order to get into the office, you need it. Otherwise, it was embarrassing. You had to call someone to come down and get you, or let you in the parking garage, or let you in the door, or you'd be turned away and you have to go home. Depends on the level of security you work. So you would, when you left the office, put that badge right in a bag somewhere special, and it would stay there. So when you went back to the office the next day, you'd know exactly where it was. Routines. We do the same thing with our car keys. If you have a devious 6-year-old like I do, you hide the remote where she can't find it, because when she gets mad at mom or dad, my young spy in training, she hides the remote, and we've got this very complicated entertainment system, and without the remote, you can't do anything. So routines: protect information, protect data, protect devices. Hansen's was this. He had a Palm Pilot. Not this Palm Pilot. This is the Palm Pilot that we used in the movie Breach, but one just like it. Who remembers a Palm Pilot? Like maybe a fraction of the crowd. The Palm Pilot, if you didn't know, was the latest in technology of 2000, 2001. You would use this innovative device called the stylus, which is just a piece of plastic, and you would tap, 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 and after maybe a half hour, you would get your meeting into Outlook in the Palm Pilot. And he kept it in his back pocket, left back pocket. And every time he sat down, he pulled it out and put it into his bag. And every time he stood up, he pulled it out of his bag and put it in his back pocket like clockwork, again and again and again. And I watched this and I asked him, boss, what's the deal with that Palm Pilot? And he said, you wouldn't understand. I said, why? He said, you're nothing but a no good, worthless clerk. If you were an executive, if you ever wanted to be an executive, you would have something like this to organize your life. Palm Pilot. Okay, I went to the Office of Science and Technology and I asked for 2 because I wanted to ingratiate myself with the boss. He had a Palm 3X, this huge fat thing. And I asked for 2 Palm 5s. You could play games on them too. I slid one across the desk to him. He pushed it back to me and said, take this back. I don't want it. I'll keep my baby here. I've written the encryption on this myself. That is another clue. We encrypt things to protect information. We had to get it away from him. Here's how we did it. I waited till he was sitting down, right? So the Palm was in his bag, his routine. And we read an assistant director into the case. And he comes into the office unannounced. Sent $20 on Hansen's desk, looks him in the eye and says, you and me, the shooting range now. And I'll bet you that 20, 5 targets out of 5, I'll beat you. Now, we used everything that I'd learned about Robert Hansen over the course of my investigation, my whole psych profile. He doesn't like to be challenged. He doesn't like anyone over him in authority. He doesn't like to be interrupted. And he really, really, really loves to shoot. 4 things. So he looks at the guy and he says, no, I'm far too busy. We weren't. And I've got stuff to do and I just can't, I couldn't possibly go down right now. And the assistant director looks at him and says, that wasn't a request. So he grumbles to his feet and he grabs his ear protection, eye protection, holsters his firearm and follows this guy down to the range, which is on the sub basement. And we're all the way up in room 9930 on the 9th floor. And I doubt any of you have been to the FBI headquarters, but if you have, you'll realize that it is the most nonsensical building ever built. It makes no sense whatsoever. You get lost if you make a wrong turn. And to get from the 9th floor at 9930 all the way down to the range in the sub basement, you actually had to go through a courtyard outside to go to a separate building and then go down. So it's not easy, but I knew I had time. And I wait, and he's down there, and I get a page on my SkyTil alphanumeric 2-way pager. And it says in-pocket shooting, it's go time. I grab the device. I also grab a floppy disk and a data card. I run down 3 flights of steps to where a tech team has just been waiting for me to get this right. I finally did. I hand it off. They say it is encrypted. We'll just copy it 1-to-1 and decrypt it later. I said, you can do that? They said, shh, we're the FBI. And I said, okay, go for it. And they're using a program for all of you computer guys out there and gals called Norton Ghost. Remember that? And they're just copying it. And I see the bar going, 32, 33, 34. And as that's happening, I get another page. And it says, don't know what happened, out of pocket, coming to you. I holstered that bad boy and knocked on the door. And they said, hey guys, I'm going to need those devices. They said, yeah, we're almost done. I said, you don't understand. He's armed and I'm not, and he's angry. I got to get that stuff up there before he gets back to the office. I knew I had about 9 minutes because of the circuitous route it takes to get all the way from the sub-basement to the 9th floor, but I was sweating. And I wait, 70%, 80%, 99%, 100. They detach the devices, hand them to me and say, run. And I do. 3 flights of steps. I get all the way to the main office. I slam the door to the main office pit room. I go into his office, which is just a little bit separate, kneel down before the bag and realize I have 3 devices and there are 4 pockets and I have no clue. And as I'm sitting there trying to cast my mind back in history, just to remember, to use psychology, to do something to remember what pocket these things go into, I hear him coming through the main door. So I just took my best guess, dropped all 3, zipped all 4 pockets up, ran back to my desk, and I put the best poker face right here. He comes into the office, glares at me, goes into his, slams his door, and I hear zip. And I thought, should I still be sitting here or should I be running down the hall? But I knew that if I wasn't there when he came out, he was so paranoid at that point, so concerned that if he didn't see me sitting there and smiling, he would run. He'd take the fake passport that I found and the open ticket to Moscow. And right now he'd be roommates with good old Edward Snowden. So I sat there and he comes out of his office and he glares at me and he says, were you in my office? And I just sat back and I said, yeah, I was in your office. I put a memo in your inbox. Didn't you see it? Now, I look really good here, but my whole back was sweating. I had to change my shirt after this. And he looks at me and then he looks at me. He says, I never want you in my office again. And he leaves for the day. 3 days later, on a Sunday, he's just loaded his final drop to the Russians and he's feeling so good about himself. And he stands on that footbridge and looks around him one last time and then retraces his steps along that old path. And he reaches his car. It's this old silver Ford Taurus. And he reaches into his pocket for his keys. He pulls them out, goes to get in his car. And 2 vans screech to a halt. Panel doors open. SWAT teams jump out. They point their weapons at him. He puts his hands up and he says, the guns are not necessary. And then he says, what took you so long? And he's arrested for espionage against the United States, numerous counts to which he would eventually plead guilty. Because the Palm Pilot is not only a calendar, it lets you know exactly when he was going to be at that park and at what time. And that is how you catch a spy. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll do my best to answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Eric. Very much appreciate that insightful and sobering look into the threat landscape of espionage, and quite the harrowing tale there. So we've got a few questions here. The first, so when somebody asked, what is the role of vendors such as VMware in committing to a nation state and its objectives? And the second part of that is, how can those allegiances be fostered?
Well, when you say committing to a nation state and its objectives, VMware is a global company. Now, we're a US-based company, but we think of ourselves as a global company. So our job is to make a world that is safe from cyber attacks. That's our goal. So when we're talking about VMware Carbon Black, which is the portion of VMware that focuses on cybersecurity, it's where I come from. I'm the national security strategist for Carbon Black, which means that I essentially bring counterintelligence to cybersecurity. Regardless of where you are in the world, we want to make you safe from cyber attacks. Now, if you're talking about nation states on the other side, yes, we are working hard to protect not only individuals and companies, enterprises and corporations and all of our customers, but agencies from cyber attacks from rogue states. And there are plenty of them out there. If you just look at what happened during the 2016 election here in the US in elections across the world. Russia has become one of the greatest rogue actors in launching cyber attacks in order to misinform, in order to disinform, to use what they call compromat, and also to change hearts and minds in voting. We saw a lot of it leading up to the election here that just happened, that we literally just finished, not only from Russia, but from North Korea and Iran and others. So yes, we are committed to protecting the world from cyber attacks, and obviously there are quite a few of them happening right now, especially, and not just nation states, but especially criminals that are learning from the nation states and launching these many attacks.
Thank you for that. So the
next question. Is there a second part to that? I think I had the first one.
It was just about how allegiances can be fostered to for businesses to support those objectives.
Oh, certainly. Well, one way that we collaborate in order to protect from cybersecurity attacks is the innovative way that VMware Carbon Black is using cloud security in order to ensure that every one of our customers has the latest data for all of the endpoint security. So in other words, if one customer is hit over here in the world by some sort of cyber attack that's innovative, then it is instantly analyzed, and every other sensor on all of our endpoint security now has learned from that attack. And that's the power of the cloud, the way that the cloud can immediately update all the sensors everywhere and ensure that that our customer base is sharing from the learning as we go out and conduct our threat hunting and learn about cyber attacks.
All right, wonderful. So next question, what are some of the best controls and practices we can have in place to mitigate insider threats?
That's a great question. So mitigating insider threats are hard. And just to give you, just to sort of back up a little bit about insiders, because I do know a little bit about it, part of it is understanding the mind of the insider. I mean, we always want to know why someone did it, right? When we learn about Robert Hansen, why did he launch these attacks? I mean, why did he steal from the FBI for 22 years? Why did he become the US's top spy? So in order to become a trusted insider, you need a few things. One, you need an opportunity to spy. So your trusted insider is always going to be in the position to gain access to the intelligence that will do the most damage. Two, you need a triggering event. So trusted insiders don't just decide to become essentially sociopaths, to betray. Usually there is some sort of triggering event, something that happened in their life. It could be a divorce, it could be a severe, something like a mortgage that they can't pay, or a gambling debt, or something terrible that happened to them and they don't have the money to pay for it and they need that money. Or it could be that they're extraordinarily disgruntled or angry. And Hansen was a combination of all those things. He was mad at the FBI because he didn't get the job he wanted, he didn't have the position he wanted, and they weren't listening to him when he said that, ironically, the FBI had to get better in its cybersecurity. And he needed a lot of money. He was, for example, to use Hansen as the example for why someone spies, he was having a lot of children, he was living in New York City, he was unable to afford the life that he wanted, and so he volunteered his services to the FBI, one, to get back at the FBI for making him angry, and two, to make some money on the side. He made quite a deal of money throughout his career. So those things can lead someone to be a trusted insider. So what sort of controls do you need? One, you have to understand your systems. You have to understand your enterprise. You have to understand where the vulnerabilities are in that enterprise. And one of the best ways to identify where someone is accessing data that they shouldn't access, because that's the best clue to learn that someone's a trusted insider, is leveraging endpoint security. Knowing what people are gaining access to things they shouldn't gain access to. That's using a combination of compartmentalization, which means that only certain people should have access to certain things. That way, if something is lost or something is compromised, you can narrow down your search for that trusted insider. And two, using zero trust. Only certain people should be able to get into certain areas within your network and your systems and gain access to that sort of information. And that can really save you against trusted insiders. There was this case that I highlight in my book, and there was a spy, a trusted insider, who worked for a defense contractor in California, and he decided that he was going to spy for a few reasons. He was broke. His wife had medical problems. He also had a girlfriend on the side. She was expensive, you know, all these problems that not normal people have. And he needed money fast. And he really loved the TV show, The Americans. I'm not making this up. And James Bond movies. And he wanted to become a spy for Russia. And so he called the Russian consulate and he called the embassy, and they didn't take him seriously. And finally, he took a thumb drive, plugged it into his secure workstation, and stole schematics for a military satellite that he was working on. He was an engineer. Well, the second that happened, the company knew, because their endpoint security warned them that he was extracting information he shouldn't. And they called the FBI. The FBI pretended to be the Russians, ran a false flag operation against him. And he gave over 6 different drops of information he stole from the company over 6 different weeks. And on the 7th, they arrested him. And by the way, as he was making money from the Russians, he wasn't from the FBI pretending they were the Russians. He wasn't spending it on healthcare for his wife, who really needed it. He was sending it all to his girlfriend. So he deserved it. So those are some of the things you can do for a trusted insider. Now, catching a trusted insider requires a whole program, and it requires a lot of help. So the critical issue is, once you see that you might be losing information, those controls will help you narrow down the search, and then you probably need a little bit of help to identify exactly who is the person who is gone rogue inside.
So our third question is, what are some best practices when opening up our business applications for users in adversarial nations?
Yes, that can be complicated. You need to, once again, ensure that you have good endpoint security, and that you're not only leveraging the best incident response, but you're also threat hunting, because you have to almost assume that you're going to be attacked. And I've dealt in security and in different businesses with, for example, setting up clean rooms. You can do that, and where you need to make sure that you're employing countermeasures to ensure that when your employees are in those other perhaps adversarial countries, and you know, we know some of them, that you are routinely sweeping the rooms for bugs, and you're ensuring that you have secure connections, and that you're ensuring that no one is listening in. That's sort of basic stuff, but also ensuring that you have proper security. You might want to send people, if they're going to be there for temporary periods of time, with what we call clean devices. So nothing is on the phone, nothing is on the laptop, that is completely clean. You can use secondary networks and good virtualization and VPNs to make sure that no one is listening in. That's also very important. The main focus, of course, is being on top of security, being always mindful of security, and in those sort of situations, always thinking that the adversary is constantly trying. So you are constantly threat hunting, not playing defense, but out there hunting the threats so that you'll find them before they land.
Thank you so much for taking the time to field those questions and offer all your experiences. Share that with us.
Thank you. It's been wonderful speaking to you all. And like I said, you are all spy hunters, and that's the way you have to think. It's the main thing I can leave you with today is that there are no hackers. There are only spies, whether it is a cyber attacker, a cyber terrorist, or a cyber criminal. They have all learned from the spy playbook. And our job in cybersecurity, our job as CISOs, our job in trying to make a world safe from cyber attackers, is to hunt those threats wherever they are and protect the data that is the currency of our lives. And thank you for having me in Canada for this last hour.